On today's episode, we get to take you on a visit to a very special charity fishing derby that so many of you, the Tackle Talk listeners, helped donate to. So you will get to hear about the impact that you all had firsthand on some very special little kids this weekend. But then after that, we're going to have some discussion on Daiwa Tatula rods, the strengths and weaknesses of the top 3 fishing leagues, pesky pike, and pursuing a career in fishing. All that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Welcome to the Tackle Talk podcast, brought to you by American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. World-class fishing gear, unmatched personal service. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Tackle Talk podcast, which is brought to you by the fine folks over at American Legacy Fishing and Outdoors. And if you were lucky enough to be anywhere around Evansville, Indiana this past weekend, you had the chance to visit their annual open house, which is held at their beautifully remodeled showroom where they had sales on top of sales on top of sales. They had screaming deals on new and used fishing gear, but even if you weren't able to make it in person, they still had some incredible sales available for you folks online too. That's why I keep telling you, you got to sign up for the email alerts. You got to become an elite member, follow them on Facebook, because sometimes these deals just drop out of the clouds and you don't want to be left out. American Legacy Fishing is also your newest Phoenix rods dealer. So they have the Phoenix rods in stock right now, including the popular Feather series, which clocks in at a very affordable $149. So go check them out over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. And as always, be sure to use code TACKLETALK10. Tackle Talk 10 saves you 10% off almost everything on the website. Some exclusions apply, but not many. Again, code TACKLETALK10 over at www.americanlegacyfishing.com. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the first order of business today is going to be a teaser of sorts, and it has to do with next week's show. So next week, September 24th, 2024, is a very special week for us here at Tackle Talk. Now, I'm not going to give too much away here today because I really do want next week's show to be the surprise that you all deserve it to be, but let's just say that if you do some critical thinking, you can probably figure out why next week is so important to us. And all I'm going to say here is that we are going to celebrate it right, in a way that I think only we here at Tackle Talk can do. It definitely is the most time, planning, effort, editing, and coordination that we've ever put into a single episode, but I can promise you it's going to be worth it. So I don't think I'm exaggerating here when I say that this is likely going to be the biggest episode in the history of Tackle Talk, and I'm very, very excited to share it with you all. So with that, I will leave the rest to your imaginations until next Tuesday, but mark your calendars, set your alarms, write a reminder. You are not going to want to miss next week's episode of Tackle Talk. Okay, really quickly here, in the fishing tournament world, Major League Fishing is currently in the middle of the second General Tire Team Series event. The Knighton Industries Heritage Cup, presented by Berkeley, is underway right now as we speak in Wisconsin. It goes September 15th through 20th. So we'll find out who wins on Friday, but again, like the last Team Series event, it's 2-man teams, secret location for the anglers. They don't know where they're going to be fishing until they show up that day. And in this event, you have some heavy hitters. You've got Zach Burge, Justin Lucas, Skeet Reese, Alton Jones Jr. and Alton Jones Sr. are on the same team, which is awesome. Father and son there. Brian Thrift, Ott Defoe, Andy Montgomery, Casey Ashley, and a lot more. So you're going to have to tune in yourself over at MajorLeagueFishing.com to see how this event shakes out. Since we do have a special episode next week, we're probably not going to give you an update on next Tuesday's show in terms of who ends up winning this event. So go follow it on your own. It's free, MajorLeagueFishing.com. All right, everybody. The next item of business here, I don't normally do this. We're a pretty practical, kind of straightforward, down the middle show. We usually have kind of a laser focus on lures, gear, techniques, and we don't usually get emotional or appeal to that side of things too much, but today I'm going to do it because it's what I'm feeling this week. So if you remember back probably 3 or 4 months ago, I mentioned on this show that there was a very special fishing derby that was planned here in Central Ohio. If you don't remember, long story short, I have a coworker whose best friend lost her 6-year-old son to a very aggressive form of brain cancer last year, 2 days before his 7th birthday. And I won't get too much more into the story out of respect for their privacy, but I cannot imagine what that family has gone through. His parents are such nice people, and the kicker, Jackson absolutely loved fishing. The photo they used of him was him holding a really nice bass, and he was really into learning different techniques and multi-species fishing with his dad. And as an angler, you just hear that story, and the only thing that comes to mind is how can we help? So Jackson's family organized the inaugural Jackson Preston Memorial Fishing Derby in their hometown of Sunbury, Ohio, to remember Jackson and his love of fishing and to help other families make lifelong memories with their kids fishing this day, but also to raise money for Angel Works and the Friends of Faith Pride and Foundation, both of which actually help Central Ohio families on childhood cancer journeys. So when my coworker told me about this derby and that they were putting it on, we wanted to do more than just donate a raffle prize. It was just one of those situations that you feel it in your gut that you can do more. You can do more than's being asked of you. So that's what we tried to do with this. Now you'll remember I initially briefly mentioned it on the show a few months ago, just like one time, sort of in passing, that I was going to be putting together donations for this event, and I wanted to purchase a new rod, a new reel, new tackle boxes, line, hooks, weights, and bobbers for all the kids that were attending. So I said on that week's show, here's my Venmo information. If you feel inclined to help out, we would greatly appreciate it, and I will make sure that it goes to good use. And in true Tackle Talk fashion, you guys showed up big time. Each and every one of you that generously donated to that Venmo fund or sent gear helped make possible what we're about to talk about. And in just 5 days of taking donations on that episode, we raised over $2,500 to help out with Jackson's Memorial Fishing Derby. That is incredible. I honest to goodness cannot thank you guys enough for your help and your generosity. With that $2,500, I was able to go out and I purchased enough rods, reels, tackle boxes, line, hooks, weights, bobbers for every kid that pre-registered for this event to get their own brand new fishing setup and loaded tackle box completely free. But that wasn't it, because then after all of that was purchased, we were still able to make a $1,000 donation to Angel Works in Jackson's memory. So Angel Works is a nonprofit actually based in Lancaster, Ohio, that has 8 unique programs to provide emotional and financial support to families dealing with childhood cancer. To date, Angel Works has helped over 1,200 families in total. They've stepped in and saved over 900 Christmases for families. And on a more somber note, they've been able to pay for over 140 funerals and much more that this organization does. So not only did your donations help make lifelong memories for these families and children attending this derby with free, brand new fishing gear and loaded tackle boxes, you also helped Central Ohio families dealing with the unimaginable, which is childhood cancer. But on a much lighter note, the event itself was amazing. Jackson's parents, Lori and Matt, and the entire team that helped produce this event did an amazing job. I would say there were probably close to 75 to 100 kids or more that were able to come out, fish with their families, and have a great day in Jackson's memory. And what was awesome was that the church that this was organized in conjunction with owns a building in a parking lot right beside the town reservoir that Jackson and his dad Matt used to fish all the time. So logistically, it was perfect. Folks could park right there. They get out, they walk to the edge of the parking lot, they check in at the table right there. We were right there with the rods and the tackle boxes, and then they could literally walk right up the hill and start fishing. It was an absolutely perfect setup for a kid's fishing derby. And then Jackson's parents made it even more special by leaning into all of Jackson's favorite things. For instance, Jackson loved jokes, and he had a friend that would send him a joke every day in the hospital. So around the entire reservoir, there were flip cards on posts that Jackson's parents had put up there that you could read a fishing joke and then flip it up and see the punchline. And then his mom, Lori, painted a bunch of these small sort of keepsake rocks with small messages or pictures on them and placed them randomly around the reservoir for people to find. Jackson loved cotton candy, so they actually had a cotton candy machine on site making fresh cotton candy for the kids. Just a very thoughtfully planned out and executed event from start to finish. And then there's the fishing. And I think almost every single kid that came to this event caught a fish. Most of them caught quite a few fish. The bluegill were cooperating. That always makes a fishing derby a lot of fun for kids. A few kids caught catfish. One kid caught 2 really nice bass. One of them was like 16 or 17 inches. But the smiles that were on these kids' faces when they were using their rods and their fishing gear, many of them catching their first fish of their life with their parents standing right there with their hand on their shoulder, or showing them how to put a wax worm on a hook, or teaching them how to cast. It was just one of those days where you realize fishing is a lot more than what we regularly do as diehard bass anglers. I go out there and I worry about, the fall rate of my 1/16 versus 1/8 ounce jig head, or should I use 10 versus 12 pound fluorocarbon for my jerk baits today? And then days like Saturday make you see how trivial all of that can be sometimes. There's a bigger picture to fishing, and sometimes I think we lose sight of the forest through the trees. So fishing is still one of the best activities to create wholesome, lifelong, lasting memories with your family and friends. And we were able to do that on Saturday with a ton of families because of one very special kid that left a lasting impression on a tight-knit community here in Central Ohio. So thank you all for your support. I say it all the time, but it bears repeating. I really think you guys, the listeners of this show, are part of the best community in fishing, and you can take that to the bank. We appreciate Matt and Lori and the entire family and crew for letting us be there to take part in this amazing event, and we are currently making plans and really excited to be even more involved next year. So for the 1,000th time, thank you all so much that helped us make this weekend possible. You guys seriously are the best. Okay, it has been a couple weeks actually, so let's make a big jump here and let's crack open the mailbag powered by Dakota Lithium.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast Mailbag, powered by Dakota Lithium Batteries. Adventure awaits at dakotalithium.com.
All right, the first question here is from Eric Dirksen, and he says, "Hey, Andrew, I watched one of your old podcasts about the only 5 rods you need, and I have a few questions for you. Question 1, on what rod or rods should I fish a jerkbait in general? Question 2, what rod or rods should I pitch with? And then question 3, do you have something against braid because I noticed none of your setups use braid? Thanks a lot, Andrew. I've started from the beginning and have watched probably half of your podcast, and I really enjoy the show. Take care, Eric." Hey, Eric. Good questions all around, and I think all 3 of these are pretty easy to answer. So we'll start with the first one. For jerkbaits, I'm going to go with like a 7-foot medium casting rod, something like that. You can go a little shorter if you want. I've used anything from like 6'8" to 7 foot, but that medium rod is important because you want it to have that give. But any 6'8" to 7 foot medium casting rod, fast or moderate fast, will do just fine for jerkbaits. That's my preference, and it also doubles as a great topwater rod. Now, which one should you pitch with? I think that depends on how heavy duty of pitching you're going to be doing. So if it's light to normal flipping and pitching, that 7-foot to 7.3 medium heavy would be my go-to. But if you're in super thick stuff, especially weeds, then I'd probably break out that 7.3 heavy that we talked about using for frogs and things like that. And the third question here is, do I have something against braid because none of the setups use it? Well, I mean, if I think back, I think of the 5, 2 of the 5 do have braid on them. Now, one is a spinning rod. Obviously, I use braid on every single spinning rod that I have, and then I tie a leader on if necessary. But then that sort of meat stick frog rod had braid on it too, usually like 65-pound braid. So, 40% of them do have braid on them. Now, if you're talking about using braid for like an all-around rod, which I'm guessing is what you're talking about, right? Throwing like Texas rigs or jigs or something on braid. In Ohio, here, it's just not really necessary, at least for where I typically fish. If you have good, solid fluoro, I would rather have that. I'd rather have the decreased visibility of fluoro. I never have to worry about tying leaders. Fluoro is my main line, works for me for my all-around rods. I'm used to it. I can cast it just as well as I can with braid. I'm just as accurate. My sensitivity is perfectly fine. It's just not necessary for me and how I fish around here because we have a whole lot more wood and rocks than we do weeds, at least the lakes that I fish. Now, if I was down again in Florida somewhere, yeah, I'd probably have braid rigged up on a lot of these setups, but I just don't. So yeah, I lean toward fluoro a lot for what are going to be like my bottom contact setups versus braid. The next question is from Jordan Milano. It says, "Hey Andrew, I've been fishing casually for my whole life, but recently it has become more of a dedicated hobby for me, and your podcast has become a staple in my fishing media diet. I got to give a shout out to my favorite guest, Shane O'Gorman. I hope to hear more from him in the future. Another fun piece of the podcast for me has been getting a glimpse into the big leagues because I became quickly overwhelmed when I started trying to get into pro fishing myself. I was wondering if you could do a breakdown on the different leagues, including their strengths and weaknesses, but also the best way to actually watch them. Thanks in advance, and thanks for all of the great info that you've imparted on us. Thanks again, Jordan." Yeah, okay, so if we go down, now I'll do this really quickly because I don't want to start any sort of fights here, but since you asked, I'll give you, I guess, my quick takes on the three leagues that have been in the headlines recently, and I think the three that most people are familiar with, at least at this point. So the Bassmaster Elite Series is the gold standard for me. Part of it could be nostalgia. Part of it could be because they're still using the 5-fish limit that we were used to growing up. We're watching what guys like me would do in our local tournaments, on Tuesdays or Saturdays or Sundays, whatever. You get to watch the exact same thing that you're accustomed to. But the strength of the Bassmaster Elite Series, I think, and Bassmaster in general, is history, because you can compare decades and decades of anglers because they've been competing in that same format the entire time. There's continuity with Bassmaster that you don't get with the other two competing leagues because they're just too new. Now, the negatives is that sometimes Bass, I think, can feel a little old-headed, a little not with the times, even though I think they've done a really good job the past couple years of trying to combat that in ways that they've really stepped up their live coverage, the social media presence, all that kind of stuff. So that's the Bassmaster side of things. Then you've got Major League Fishing. Major League Fishing and the Bass Pro Tour in particular, the highest level of Major League Fishing, they are definitely newer kids on the block. They're not the newest one. We'll get to the newest one here in a second, but they've only been around for something like 5 or 6 years or whatever they've been. Before that, they were just a TV show, and then they made the move to become an actual bona fide fishing league to try and rival Bassmaster. But their strengths, I think, in terms of Major League Fishing are the conservation mindset with their immediate catch, weigh, release format. It's so much better for the fish in the long run versus boxing them in a live well all day, running them to a weigh-in, transporting them from the boat to the holding tanks, to the stage, back to the tanks, back to the lake, and then releasing them like tens of miles away from their home, not to mention all of the delayed mortality that probably happens with those type of tournaments. So that's a plus for Major League Fishing, but then you've got more consequential catches throughout the day because every fish counts. So they're not limited to 5 fish, and the different rounds often reset or zero the score, so it prevents these kind of like multi-day runaways where 2 days before the finals who's actually going to end up winning because they're so far ahead. You don't have that in Major League Fishing. So I would say those are their strengths. Now the weaknesses, I'd say they're relatively new, so there's not as rich a history, obviously, with its competitors. Now there are some competitors with rich history, but ironically, their rich history is with Bassmaster before they made the move over to Major League Fishing. So there's that little wrinkle. Then there's always a lot of drama that seems to follow Major League Fishing, and no matter how you feel about Boyd Duckett and the leadership of MLF, there's always going to be some murmurs that come from the competitors when you have someone who is an owner, a sponsor, and a competitor, and they're all the same person. I personally like Boyd. I think he's a very nice guy. I think a lot of times people just get negative for the sake of being negative. I like the fact that there's more options out there to watch, but if I had to nail down one negative, that would probably be the one that I think a lot of people are going to say, just the drama that seems to come with Major League Fishing, and then that potential conflict of interest with some of the leadership. And then you have the National Professional Fishing League, or the NPFL, and I think the NPFL is still too new for us to really get a grip on what their identity is. Brad Fuller and the crew over there seem to be moving in the right direction. I'll definitely give them that. Over the past couple years, they've made a lot of waves, and they've made a lot of improvements, and they're trying to be different. They're trying to break the mold a little bit, and I do respect that. I mean, they just went out with a full forward-facing sonar ban for 2025, so they're putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to differentiating themselves between the other pro bass fishing circuits out there. Now, the weakness, I think, is that the NPFL is still trying to attract big enough names to be as relevant as Bass and MLF to regular everyday viewers. I think for the competitors, they're a very appealing league to go after and to try and fish, but for actual fans of bass fishing, I think that's their biggest weakness right right now is just the name recognition of some of the guys. Now, again, they've made huge strides, and you're seeing household names make their way over and fish the NPFL. You had like Patrick Walters, you had Kyle Welcher, all those type of guys going over and fishing those things, and I think you'll see hopefully a lot more now that there's this cool wrinkle of no forward-facing sonar next year, and some of these guys are going to want to put their money where their mouth is a little bit and go fish it. At least that's my hope. So NPFL, again, on the right track, but I just think there's a big talent gap, which is definitely closing, but still there. And the separation between like the best in the league and the worst in the league, I think is greater than the other two big leagues out there. So that's my really quick take on all three, again, from just a regular dude that likes to watch fishing. I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers here. Those are just kind of like my quick thoughts on the top three. All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second, but first we are brought to you in part by Dakota Lithium Batteries. And this past weekend, I finally got out on the water. I took my kayak to the river, I pushed off, I was ready to go, dropped my motor, pushed my throttle, and nothing happens. And the craziest thing is I have such reliable batteries that I knew it was not a battery issue. And wouldn't you know it, my battery was perfectly fine. It was a motor issue. That's the kind of confidence that I have in my batteries. When something goes wrong, I know that the last thing I should be looking at is my batteries, because I have the most dependable batteries in the world in my kayak. They're Dakota Lithium batteries. They have never let me down, not once. They have put up with my abuse. They've put up with all of the elements that I've left them in, rain, dirt, mud, you name it. I have beat the tar out of these batteries, and they take it every single time. Not only are they durable, Dakota Lithium batteries are twice the power of traditional batteries at half the weight. They charge up to 5 times faster, last up to 4 times longer, have 100% US-based customer support, and they come with a whopping 11-year warranty. So if you want your own Dakota Lithium batteries, all you got to do, go to www.dakotalithium.com and be sure to use code TACKLETALK5. Not only does that help them know that we sent you, it also saves you 5% off your next battery purchase. Again, that's code TACKLETALK5 over at www.dakotalithium.com, the official lithium battery of Bassmaster. All right, the next question here is from Sammy Breeden. And they say, hey, Andrew, I've heard you talk about Dobbins rods so much. After the episode about Fenwick's new revamp, which rod will be your favorite? P.S. I bought an Elite Fenwick rod on the Labor Day American Legacy Fishing Sale, and yes, they do have the best customer service, and I'll tell you about that later. Thanks, Sammy. This is a question I think that's really getting tougher and tougher to answer every year, because there are so many brands stepping up their game. Fenwick is a great example of it, like you mentioned, but there are a lot of others too. So 3 or 4 years ago, if you would have asked me, almost every rod, not every rod, but most of them that I had were Dobbins rods. And now I still have quite a few Dobbins rods, but other brands are making their way into my everyday rotation more and more. And that's the fun part about not being sponsored by anybody and not being required to use anybody's gear. We're independent, right? Just like most regular anglers are. Now, if you're a pro or whatever, you have to pay your bills. I understand that. But most people that go out fishing in this country are independent. You can use whatever brand you want. So I really, at least over the past couple years, I've really adopted that mindset where I don't necessarily want all of my rods to be from one company. I want to branch out. I want to see what's out there. That's the best part about fishing, is trying out new lures, trying out new reels, new rods, finding what you like and what you don't like. That's a really fun experience for me. And I think you would really be selling yourself short to just across the board say, I'm not going to use any brand but this one. Now, with that being said, if you ask me which one I prefer right now, Dobbins or Fenwick, I'm going to say that I think right now, Fenwick barely snuffs out Dobbins in that $100 range when you compare like a Fenwick Eagle to a Dobbins Maverick. But then I think Dobbins barely beats out Fenwick across the board from like $120 to about $280. That range, I still like my Dobbins rods. But again, that's a very big generalization. It depends on the specific rod, the specific model, what you're looking for. But then I really do think, at least right now, Fenwick beats out Dobbins in the super high-end category when you compare something like a Fenwick World Class to a Dobbins Ecstasy. So right now, that's how I feel. I think Fenwick barely edges him out at super budget-friendly rods. I think Dobbins still has the upper hand in that mid-range, and then I think Fenwick squeaks him out on the ultra-high end. All right, the next question is from, and I apologize in advance, sir, I know I'm going to get this wrong, Sindre Taraldleen. And they say, hey, Andrew, I discovered your podcast earlier this year, and I've been an avid listener ever since. Every Sunday when I go out fishing, I will listen to that week's podcast while I throw a line in. I'm originally from Norway, but currently live in North Dakota. All I've fished until I moved here in my early 20s is small trout, so I'm having a blast catching all of these new species. My question is regarding to leader length and line strength overall. Today, I was fishing at a lake I often go to, which in general has 1.5 to 3 pound largemouth bass and pike. Near the end, something ate my black and blue chatterbait near the shore that I couldn't quite see clearly due to the water being a little muddy. It looked pretty big, and it must have been because literally in under 2 seconds, it ate my chatterbait and tore it off like it was made out of butter. The line looked like it snapped right by where I'd tied to the snap. I'm also a big fan of snaps like you are. I'm using a 17-pound mono leader tied to a 30-pound braid main line. The leader and snaps are tied with uni knots, which could have some effect maybe, but I'm not sure. The rod is a medium heavy, fast action ugly stick, and the reel is an Abu Garcia Max X. I'm really trying to break down the reasons why it snapped off so fast and could really use some help. This feels like my big one that got away, and I never thought I could feel such pain from fishing. Is it the pound test strength of my line? Is it the mono leader? Or could it have been the drag that I set too tight? A 3-pound pike had no problem pulling line earlier in the day at the same amount of drag, so I can't imagine it would be that. Sorry for the lengthy question. Thanks for all you do, Sindre. Hey, Sindre, so based on the story, I just think a pike got you. There is no bigger enemy on planet Earth to chatterbaits than pike. And the dead giveaway is when you said that in under 2 seconds it tore it off like it was made out of butter. That's not line failure. That's not failure. That's teeth. That is a pike eating your chatterbait, making one turn, and your 17-pound mono leader rubs up against one of those sharp teeth, and boom, your line is sliced. Bye-bye chatterbait. Nice knowing you. Pike 1, Sindre 0. So while that part sucks, and I will admit that it does, I don't think you need to dwell on it any more than that. Don't let this one haunt you, because it's probably not the big bass that you're after anyway. It's a stinky, slimy little snot rocket that cut your line. It's not your line's fault. It's not your leader's fault. It's not your knot's fault. You were a victim of pike theft. It's a serious crime. It's taken over this country, one bladed jig at a time. I feel like we need like dramatic music behind me. Cue that, please. On average in this country, a chatterbait loses its life every 52 seconds to pike theft. For just 24 cents a day, you can help. Okay. Or like you could go the opposite way. It's almost election season here in the United States. So give me some like patriotic music or something in the background. I'm Andrew Hayes. I'm running for state senate this year, and I will be your tough on pike candidate come November. I will clean these streets up, and we will make pike theft a thing of the past. You know, like if I ever run for president, that's going to be one of my key platforms. Get pike theft of chatterbaits under control. But for now, unfortunately, there's not much you can do except keep your head up. Don't overthink it, because there's nothing that you could have done to prevent that. You just got to get out there, keep on casting, don't dwell on it. All right, the next question is from Levi Brower, and he says, hey, Andrew, I just picked up a 2023 Tatula 100 based on your praise for its greatness, and I must say I agree. Also, I paired this reel with a 7.3 medium-heavy Tatula rod. I'm really digging it, but you seem to have some disdain for the Tatula rods. What do you not like about them? Maybe I just haven't used it enough to recognize its flaws, so I'm interested to hear what you found with them. Hey man, thanks for the question. I guess we'll start by backing up a second. If I ever gave you the impression that I have disdain for Tatula rods, that certainly was not my intention. There are some great rods in that Tatula lineup from Daiwa. In fact, I still own one. It's become kind of like a big buzzbait rod for me when I know that I'm going to be throwing like a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce buzzbait all day long. But I definitely don't hate the Tatula rods at all. Regular Tatula rods, they're great. Tatula Elites are great. They're both just in such competitive price points that there's like 20 different options out there and you can't throw them all at once. Now, if I were to nitpick about one thing about my current Tatula rod that I have, it's that it's a little stiff. Not just in my hand, but it actually loads up stiff too. That backbone is very rigid. I wish it had a little bit more give to it. Again, I know it's a fast, but even in a fast taper, I feel like it should have a little bit more something right there in the middle that it just doesn't have. But again, for what I use it for, big 3/8, 1/2 ounce buzz baits, it's great. You just got to find that sweet spot for it. I found the sweet spot with buzz baits. I love it for buzz baits, but other people could pick up this rod and say, no, this is the perfect, Texas rig rod or flipping rod or whatever. It's just personal preference. But for me, me, I just tend to kind of gravitate toward different rods in that same price point because there's so much out there. But no, I certainly don't have disdain for Tatula rods. I'm sorry you got that impression. Definitely not the case. All right, and the final question here today is from Matt Niesner, and he says, "Hey Andrew, I have a big ask, but I'm 27 and I want to start a career being outdoors, fishing or hunting. I grew up with a rod and a bow in my hand, fishing from saltwater to creek fishing. Any advice on how to make fishing a career path besides professional fishing? I'm okay on the water, but I would never consider myself a pro. Love your show, and I take 99% of your advice to the field. Thanks, Matt." Oh, this is a great question. This is one that we definitely, I don't think, have ever been asked on this show before, but I guarantee there's a lot of people listening to this that want to know the answer to this or want some tips because everybody would love, to work in fishing or work in something they love. So I am going to give you some real talk here for a second. I'm going to shoot you straight. I'm not much older than you are, and I know exactly what you're thinking. You're thinking whatever career or industry that I'm in right now definitely isn't as fun as fishing or hunting would be because you have a natural passion for fishing and hunting. They're hobbies, they're activities. They could even be obsessions for you. But buddy, all of that changes when it becomes your job. Because just like any other industry, if you actually work in the fishing industry, that halo effect kind of wears off real quick. And you'll see that this industry has its warts just like everything else. I've seen it happen to quite a few of my friends firsthand. So my actual career and my regular job is with a professional baseball team. So I've worked there for, I think, about 10 or 11 years now, and I've seen so many people come in because they want to work in sports, and I put that in air quotes here, want to work in sports, and they think it's going to be great because they played sports in high school or college, and they spend their spare time watching sports, so naturally they think, well, it'd be a dream to work in sports and do that for a living. But then after a few months or a year or 2 years or whatever, they realize that it's not much different than any other job because the novelty wears off, and you realize, oh, this is just a regular job. You're still doing the same things that you'd be doing at your old job, just in a different location. So that novelty and that sort of halo effect doesn't last forever, and it's not going to be as cool as you think. Now, that's warning number one. I've seen it in the sport industry. I've seen it with plenty of my friends that went to work for actual fishing companies. Once you work in it and it becomes your job, it can sour that thing that you used to love so much. So I'm just being real with you. Think about that aspect of it too. It's not always rainbows and sunshine. Anything that you make your job, you risk it losing that luster that you used to have for it. So that's the Debbie Downer side of your answer, I guess. But on the other side, it's a lot more positive. So I absolutely love the fishing industry. A lot of people don't, but you know why they don't? That's because they work for one of the companies. Me, on the other hand, and people that are kind of like in my position, I get to be on the outside of all of that because we're just an independent show. So I get to soak in everything and enjoy it, and then we get to talk about it honestly. That's why I love going to ICAST. I love going to the Bassmaster Classic. Most people that work in fishing dread ICAST. They're not really pumped to go to the Bassmaster Classic and work some booth or try and hawk lures for 3 days in a row or trying to make distributorship deals or whatever, or do sales calls, right? That's not as fun as it is for us to go there and just soak everything in and really kind of enjoy it and then get to do our own thing with it. So that would actually be my advice, would be to try and carve your own path. Think about what you're good at. For me, I really like to talk to people. I'm a pretty intellectually curious individual. And here's the weird one. I actually have a music background because I used to play in a band when I was younger. So I knew my way around audio equipment and editing software and stuff like that really well. So for someone that likes to talk, they like to absorb information, and they're really good with audio equipment, that screams podcast. That's what I was kind of like meant to do, I think. A long form audio format that fits my interests and my skill set. And then I was able to build it for myself from scratch versus going and trying to work for somebody else or with somebody else. I wanted to do it on my own so that I could control what we talked about, how we ran the show, how we approached gear and reviews and conversations and things like that. I didn't sour on the fishing industry because I got to avoid all of the bad or annoying parts of it. So my advice would be find your strengths and then try and build something with those strengths that will last. Because if you take a job as like, an account manager at Ugly Stick or something, that's not going to be what you're actually wanting to do. You're not going to be wanting to make calls or emails or spreadsheets or sales presentations just like you would at any other company, because that's no different than any other job. What is different is if you can do something for yourself and build something of worth or of value in the fishing or hunting world. That could be making your own tackle company and selling baits and then slowly growing that business. It could be starting a YouTube channel, but my advice there would be don't just start some random YouTube channel with a GoPro strapped to your chest fishing HOA ponds, because you have to be different. There's a trillion of those out there already. So you have to have a lane or a niche, or you could start a website or a podcast or an email newsletter, something that you can build and you can be passionate about and build it into a career eventually versus trying to just like jump all of a sudden and start some career in fishing. Now, I don't mean to be like, all Gary V motivational speech type garbage or whatever, but I think it's the truth. If you think working in the fishing industry just means being one of 50 people making sales calls at Berkeley, I don't think that's going to be as fulfilling to someone like you as you think it is. At least it wouldn't be to me. So instead, I would rather find what I'm good at, identify those strengths, and then match them to something that you can build as more of like a side hustle and gradually grow it into a full-fledged career doing what you love. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but that would be the route that I would take. All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. Reminder, you do not want to miss next week's Tackle Talk episode. It is going to be, I think, the biggest, coolest episode that we've ever done for a very special occasion. I'm not going to spoil it, but again, set your alarms, write yourself a note. If there is an episode of Tackle Talk that you don't want to miss recently, I really think this is it. We put a ton of work into coordinating this episode, and I really think it's going to bring a lot of smiles to a lot of people's faces. So we will see you next week for that. Until then, find us on the internet, www.tackletalkpodcast.com. Find us on Facebook or Instagram at Tackle Talk Podcast, YouTube at Tackle Talk Podcast. Shoot us an email, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for a very, very special episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2021. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.